I went to federal prison for a very unusual reason. I did not cross state lines. I did not have a firearm. There was no particular reason I ever should have gone to federal prison. But the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon was in the middle of conducting this sort of experiment. They had found this law on the books from the late 1980s called the Len Bias Act, colloquially referred to as, really, it's called drug delivery resulting in death. So there was this famous America's golden boy basketball player named Len Bias. He'd just been signed to the Boston Celtics, and then he overdosed and died on cocaine. So obviously, because he's America's golden boy, we have to blame someone else because he's an innocent sports superstar. So clearly he didn't just use to do drugs. Only the bad people do drugs. He must have been corrupted by someone. It must have been someone else's fault. So they created this whole federal law just to try to charge his friend who had supplied him with the cocaine with murder. And he didn't actually go down for the murder. He was able to get off on it. I don't remember how. And then this law sat on the federal books and just was pretty dormant because, most state crime is prosecuted inside of the states. That's how it's supposed to be laid out in our federal constitution. But then here comes the opioid epidemic. Okay, so you were seeing all these news headlines: OxyContin, opioid epidemic, overdose crisis, da 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 da. And people are saying the government did this. They failed us. They let this happen. And so the government went, pah, us? No. And they found a bunch of scapegoats, criminals who could be villainized, whose mugshots could be paraded across the television. So they resurrected this law from the 1980s, which had barely ever been used in the 1990s and early 2000s. They started using it right around my time. Lucky me. Essentially what it does is it takes a drug overdose that is an accident and gets it treated like a homicide. Because Americans love to blame people and we conflate vengeance with justice. Pretty early on, we knew that these laws were counterproductive because they made people less likely to call 911 during an overdose, which was increasing the rates of overdose in the jurisdictions they were being used. I was in the lucky cohort. It was being used in the District of Oregon for about 1 year. So I was one of very few people that got prosecuted for this, and Oregon no longer does it. If the state would have prosecuted me, they would have charged me with delivery of heroin. We don't have a resulting in death law here. And I would have got maybe probation, maybe a year or two in prison. Clearly that was not sufficient for the feds, and so they indicted it federally. I could have got 20 years. That's the mandatory minimum. I'm white, middle class, fairly privileged, Air Force veteran, EMT, college, etc., etc. So I got a very low sentence of 5 years. And my friend Justin that died, he was only my victim upon his death, because while he lived, they called him criminal.